This morning we have been deliberating on the new aspects of the company law, what changes have been made. So we have discussed the cross-border, we have discussed the fast track. We had a pretty good insight from the regulators now. So that is also very important. But moving ahead, the perspective is that how NCLT will be framed, what will be the processes. As well as when we move ahead, then in cross-border, what are the issues? In fast track, what are the issues? What are the process? Because concept is one thing, but process is important. So how we have structured the presentation is that we have divided it into two sections. I am taking care of the first section, the overview of M&A provisions, NCLT part, transitional provisions, and the procedural changes that have been made comparing the both of these two acts, the 1956 as well as 2013. Second section, my colleague Manoj will take, discussion on the process and procedure on the new concepts. So I am not taking care of the concepts, I am talking as a whole, and the specific concepts he will take care, and how the comparative procedure will be taken care of. Starting from the existing position, this is how the M&A transactions take place. So there are two important provisions. One we call as section 391 to 394 of the Companies Act. Second is 395. Merger, amalgamation, demerger, financial reconstruction, capital reduction, if it's a part of the scheme, all comes under this 391 to 394, which we practically call as a single window clearance. And 396 is for the central government. Moving to the 2013 era, if we just structure the same slide, then we see that 230 to 234 is talking of the same thing that 391 to 394 was talking. There is a separate section of 235 that is talking of the same thing that 395 was talking. But there are three new concepts in between. So first thing is corporate debt restructuring. Now corporate debt restructuring was never a part of 391 to 394 under the 2013 Act. Though the code was wide enough, but CDR powers lie with RBI itself. So those powers still lie, but a specific provision has been incorporated in section 230. One special category of fast track merger that we have already discussed, 233, and cross-border merger, 234. So it's just an extension of how the law will take shape. And like there was 396, so there is a corresponding section of 237. Now what are the changes? If we talk of M&A per se, what are the changes? Each point has relevance. NCLT that we are going to deliberate upon, fast track merger, cross-border merger, treasury shares, merger of listed company, CDR, approval of scheme through postal ballot, minority squeeze out, limit to objection. One thing that is written is registered value. So these all are new concepts in the sense, and when we are talking of dissenting shareholder, it is also linked with the same. Now having said that, 391 to 394 was so far till now considered as a complete code, but as we move on and when we will think, then probably NCLT we can say can be a complete code or can be a single window clearance. Why? So what is the difference? So these three authorities, High Court, BIFR and CLB, moving forward when the act is established, then the powers empowered which are given to these three authorities will be taken care by NCLT. And currently if we see, then how, suppose we are going through a scheme of arrangement. So M&A's High Court we have to go. If there is a sick company, then it goes to BIFR. But if the sick company is revived, BIFR continues. If the sick company cannot be revived, then BIFR transfers the case to the High Court and High Court orders for the binding of the company. Now, there is no need of transferring. The same forum NCLT will be deciding on the continuation or liquidation of the company. Then CLB again, operation mismanagement we have to. So first of all, currently we have to see that which forum we have to do, and then that forum has specific limitations. So now good news is that every corporate matter, we can say that as a matter of corporate justice, NCLT is getting born. So it removes the problem of multiple regulators in the sense. Now, this is just clarifying that High Court, what High Court is doing, what CLB is doing, what BIFR is doing. And then, from the appeal part, which regulator appeal is being formed. So now what will be happening, that all the things will be vested to NCLT. NCLT appeal will go to National Company Law Appellate Tribunal, and then there will be, on a question of law, Supreme Court will come into play. So there are certain transitional provisions that I'll just tell. But before that I'll cover the structure. So how NCLT is framed, there were discussion that how many NCLT benches will be there, how many. So we have to first see that how the current structure is there. So there is a High Court. High Court is state registered office specific. So every state there is a separate High Court is there. Then CLB there is a principal bench, and there are metros, there are 4 benches. If we talk of BIFR, then again BIFR principal bench is there, and then it moves again. The way NCLT is structured is that principal bench is going to be in New Delhi, and other benches, the law says that it will be as may be prescribed. But if we refer the rules, then what the rule says that the existing CLB offices will be converted to the NCLT part. Now, as to composition, there will be president, there will be 2 types of members. There will be a judicial member and there will be technical member. So again, when it talks of the member, so every member will be having a 5 years of experience, that the law says. And then company secretary, chartered accountant, that's a process that who can apply, what will be there. These are the notified provisions as on date with respect to NCLT. One of the provisions that we see here is 411, 412, qualification of the members and the term of office and all. So, though the provision is notified, but if we see, then Madras Bar Association had initially challenged the constitutional validity of NCLT. So in 2010, Supreme Court has delivered a judgment that it has given a code that you have to follow these guidelines. Now in the guidelines, the member, there was a specific level for which member. So there was a secretary level that if you are appointing the person, then it should be a secretary level. But if we see the actual composition that has come out, so that has come out at a joint secretary level. So again, the NCLT in itself is challenged. The matter is pending with the Supreme Court. The next hearing is on 27th of this February. So the issue is first that comes to my mind is that if there is just a issue of the level, then level can always be changed. But there are 2 to 3 questions that have been raised. So first issue is that if you had prescribed the guidelines, why these guidelines have not been followed. The second issue is that the question is that which is raised is that till now judges, high courts have been empowered to do all kind of things. But now tribunal is a quasi-judicial body. So can quasi-judicial body perform that kind of justice? But we are hopeful that these kind of things will not come in and it will take its own shape and we will see NCLT following. The only thing that is coming to my mind is the position part, and I think position part can be taken care of. But as on date, NCLT matter is pending with the Supreme Court as to what will happen. Presuming it goes ahead, what will happen to the transitional provisions? So there are 3 kind of cases, like we have discussed that there are 3 kind of authorities. There is a High Court case, M&A matter that is pending. The law says that all the pending matters will be transferred from High Court to NCLT and the process will continue. I can recall Nitin has mentioned that there should be a cut-off date, because if the matter is pending at the final stage and then you have to go and then NCLT person has to read, so there will be issues. We are hopeful that some kind of clarity will come, that there will be a cut-off date and there will be a level before which the matter should be transferred, otherwise there can be issues. Now if we see the SICA cases, the BIFR cases, then all BIFR cases shall abate. Because there is a change in how we are seeing the BIFR companies presently based on their network, and how we will be considering the SIC companies henceforth, that will be their ability to repay their secured debt. So all the pending cases shall stand abate, and if required, then fresh reference has to be made. The third thing is CLB cases. CLB cases will also be transferred to NCLT. But there is a section 10F that has been retained. So what 10F says that if an appeal is pending from CLB to the High Court, then that matter will not be transferred to NCLT. So if there is a CLB case, that will be transferred. If there is an appeal that is pending, that will not be transferred, that the High Court will just take its own care of. So these are the transitional provisions, how the things will go. Just shifting to the procedural part, what are the changes? So if we see 230, then 230 says that when we file an application, then there are certain things to be disclosed. So first thing is that all the material facts have to be disclosed, the latest financial position has to be disclosed, any investigation and proceeding has to be disclosed, and if reduction is a part of share capital, then it has to be separately disclosed. So that reduction was not earlier, it was not a requirement, but that has to be disclosed now. Now, a change that we have already discussed in the morning, that currently if we see, then what happens, there is a board meeting, there is a shareholder meeting, and then after the meeting, there is the issue of notices to the ROC and OC and RD. So when the stage of ROC and RD comes, then a scrutiny has already been made by the shareholders. But going ahead, the notice of the proposed meeting is to be given to all the authorities along with the shareholders, creditors, as well as debenture holders. Now this debenture holder is a new concept. Earlier, if debenture holders' rights were getting affected, then there was a requirement of a notice. If their rights were, but not, the point is that as good as the shareholder, as good as the creditor, as good as the debenture holders. And there are some authorities which are in bold in the slide. So one is Income Tax Authority, second is Reserve Bank of India, and third is sectoral regulators. Till now, if we see that Income Tax Authority, there was no notice, neither before, neither after. If there was an NBFC which was getting merged, then also there was no need of approval. Once you had done it, then you were just supposed to intimate that this is the transaction that has happened. There was no prior approval. And sectoral regulators, like different industry regulators, different ministries, that was also not there. So now the point is, though technically it is written that they have to give within 30 days, but we have to see that if on the 28th day they give a letter that we need further information, or whether it's an approval, whether it's an extension, because so many authorities, this is going to be challenging that how the things. And the point is, though there is a limit for objections, so every shareholder, every creditor cannot object. It has to have a particular minimum scale of percentage value. But the point is, if all these things, actually if you see, if the AGM, but the rules say here is that the comments have to be given to the chairman appointed for the meeting, and then that has to be discussed during the meeting. Now the point is, suppose there is an adverse comment of any authority. Now that adverse comment is handed over to the chairman. Now what that impact is having in the meeting? I mean, if there is any of the objection, you can rightfully submit that to the RD. You can rightfully submit that to the NCLT. If not NCLT, always to the RD, which is the representative of the central government. But the point is, there will be a lot of nuisance because practically chairman is only concerned with whether the voting is yes or no. If we see the present regime, then in the present regime, suppose a person is saying that he has not given my money, this is fraud. Chairman has no role in that. Chairman is appointed by the court, and he has only one power, that he can say, he can take either your yes or no. Only the voting takes place if we see a practically court convened meeting. But now if all these things are coming at the shareholder level, then maybe considering that RBI has raised an objection to the scheme, maybe the shareholders can also vote accordingly, or I mean that's a issue that regulators and shareholders are getting mixed. So maybe they would like to, so there are proxy advisory firms, there are a lot of shareholders, they would like to wait at what kind of review the regulators have given. So this is going to be a challenge, how we see. Then when we issue a notice with the explanatory statement, then it has to give an explanatory statement. It has to give, more importantly, a valuation report by a registered valuer. I'll just take 5 minutes on, I'll just stop here because registered valuer is, valuation is what I am doing day in, day out. So see, there are two changes. So one change is that there is a registered valuer, right? And second thing is that the valuation report is to be furnished. Now you see, historically in M&A transactions, valuation reports are not considered a part of the public document. So if there is a listed company, now SEBI has asked all the listed companies to upload the valuation reports. But once we file the scheme, then valuation reports is it is never put to public domain. So now, and basically valuation is something that anybody and everybody can question. There is no good or bad. There is always a thing that one can be questioned. Now, registered valuer has not been discussed since morning. So the point is, I think Monica had mentioned it, that RBI has provided one valuation, SEBI has provided one valuation, and different regulators have prescribed different valuation. But if we see the way the registered valuer has been framed, so regardless of who is appointed as a registered valuer, there is a lot of flexibility that is provided in the rules of registered valuer, that registered valuer is not saying that you have to do a discounted cash flow, or you have to do method A, method B, method C. It is saying you can apply these 10 methods, or you can apply any of the methods prescribed by SEBI or income tax or any other. So there is a lot of scope, and they will be coming from a regulated person, there will be limited person involved, and the quality will also improve. And to the extent I know, and Ministry is also looking at coming out with a valuation standard.